Hello internet! With the first version of Arknights Endfield almost ending, I have tested a lot of teams, I've watched a lot of teams being played, and I've went through a lot of different builds of different characters, and it's finally time for me to compile a complete tier list for the game. And I would like to do something different for this tier list, where I'd like it to be fairly complete for multiple different scenarios. Because you see, with a game like Arknights Endfield, there's not just one list that you have to follow that shows you the value of certain characters or teams, because under different circumstances and different goals, the value of a team will change. For example, if you're asking for Avywenna to just one-shot a boss, she can do pretty well at that. But if you ask her to fight against multiple different enemies, she might struggle a little bit, especially if the enemies are scattered, or at the very least, it doesn't feel as good to do, which is why I say the value of these teams and characters are significantly different depending on the build and situations that you're pitching them against and the goal that you want to achieve. With that said, I'd like today's video to have multiple different lists so that for whichever type of character you are, be it a speed clear type of player that really wants the best, strongest character that can clear things quickly, or perhaps you're just a casual that are looking for a really nice to use, convenient team that can generally be useful anywhere. So yep, do use the timestamp for your own convenience. And with all that said, let's just dive in. I'll start with the first tier list, and I've got multiple different ones coming as well. And the first tier list I have for you will be a general use tier list. And first, let me define this tier list really quickly. This is a list of characters and teams that are generally useful in any circumstances, where their main goal is just a mix of clearing things quickly, clearing them well, without you having to break any sweat. And the better they are at doing so, the higher they are on this list. The final point is I have not ranked these tier lists from left to right, only from the top to bottom. Within the tier itself, there's no separation of which specific team is better in a specific tier, just because I think skill and timing does play a big part with playing this game. If you play, say, a physical team really well, they're definitely gonna rank way higher than if you just have never touched a last Rite team before. If all that said, let's just start. We're gonna start with the top tier. Just get this out of the way, you know? We got the Laevatain Heat team. The Laevatain Heat team I'm talking about will consist of Laevatain, Wolfguard, Arknights/Antal, and finally Ardelia. I won't spend too much time on this because I'm sure everyone already knows the Laevatain Heat team is significantly strong. She boasts one of the best performance in AoE scenarios and even single target scenarios, assuming you have a completely built one. There are players who can speed clear bosses with Laevatain, clear the boss slowly but completely, and you might not even have to like time your skills that much in order to play a good Laevatain team well. There's not much to say about this. She's by far the most convenient and still boasts one of the highest numbers for any teams in the game. So yep, Laevatain for the win. That tier's a pretty simple one. Everything is just so much simpler with a Laevatain team, so I think that's the best team in the game for general use. So if you're looking for something comfy and simple that can solve anything, Laevatain is your girl. Next up, let's take a look at tier A. These are characters or teams that aren't exactly as simple to use or as valuable or as convenient as the team above them, but they're still incredibly strong. To start us off, we've got Yvonne. The Yvonne Ice team I'm talking about here will be something general like Yvonne, Zaihi, Alesh with gilberta. And with Tangtang coming in, I will say this first. Yvonne may need a second look when she's released because I do think they have good synergy. She might actually perform better for a general tier list with the addition of a very consistent cryo inflictor like Tangtang next version. But well, we're talking about this version right now, so the Yvonne team will sit at tier A. This team functions fine. They struggle a little bit in AoE scenarios, but for the fact that you have a gilberta on the team, it actually solves it almost completely. But for players who are running an Yvonne team without gilberta, you're gonna find that Yvonne really doesn't do as well in AoE situations like daily farming or just Umbral Monument stage with multiple enemies, where her attacks are not big ranged at all and her ultimate is straight up single target. In my opinion, that's actually the main reason why she can't be tier S for me. It's because she really does need that one other 6-star in gilberta to do well in AoE scenarios, but compared to Laevatain, she's just good anywhere, and you really just need a Laevatain and a free Ardelia with 2 other very accessible characters. So yep, the reason why Yvonne is in A isn't because she's just weak for damage, but more like she needs something more specific, and without that gilberta gather, sometimes she might not be as good, and you might feel awkward playing against multiple enemies that are scattered around in some of the Umbral Monument stages, for example. However though, I will say with good skill, you can still play her really well. Is she at the tier of Laevatain for general use? In my opinion, not quite, but she's still a really strong single target character, and under those scenarios, she definitely shines. What holds her back is just a little bit of an issue with AoE situations, though it actually gets solved with gilberta, so I might actually put her up in this S for general use if you do own gilberta. But in my opinion though, combining every factor, I think she's sitting in tier A. Next off, we'll talk about all the physical characters, which we see Endmin, Depan, Pogra, and Ember. You see for this tier list, and each of this different character on this list stands for their own entire team. For example, Endmin and Depan is actually used very much as the main damage output for physical teams, where you're going to either use Endmin or Depan, and then combine those with a Chen Qianyu, and with the rest being the other physical character characters that can inflict vulnerability, stuff like Pogranichnik, stuff like Laevatain or Ember. The physical team is nothing that's news for us. I think a lot of us have already tried a physical team or at least heard of and watched people play them. Their pro is really not to be doubted at. But yep, let's just start with the Endmin / the Pan physical team, where one of the main sources of damage output will usually be stacking vulnerabilities, turning them into crush. The reason why I put them in A tier is because they're quite accessible and their damage output is incredibly high. However though, that'll only be the case once you have the whole team fully built up and invested, because for physical teams, you're not just doing damage with just Administrator's Crush or Japan's Crush, you're actually doing a lot of damage from pretty much everyone, even Chen Qianyu's ult. But then again though, let's just assume you do have them fully invested. I do think their performance is still an A, with them being quite skill dependent as well. If you're able to maximize the value of the peak physical team with Pogranichnik's Breach and still stacking up vulnerability in time to also turn them into crush fully, your damage output is actually going to be so high that you could even compare them to a Laevatain Heat team play perfectly, but it does need way more thinking and way more skills and timing. So in my opinion, for general use case where if you're just trying to have a simple team that doesn't require too much thinking, they can really much still function. But are they at the same tier as Laevatain though? I personally think there's a decent difference there. I do think Laevatain is just so simple to use, and that's one of the main values that you will have with her. You just need to convert 4 heat infliction into melting flames and use your ult, spam basics, and that's generally already just it for her. You can maximize her kit even further with good skill though, which is why I decided to rank the Endmin / the Pan Crush physical team in tier A. I think they're good for general use case, maybe close to Laevatain, not exactly the same level of Laevatain though. Let me know if you disagree. I think this is like, you know, you could put them up there, you could put them 1 tier below. They're really close to each other for me though. Next on the list will be the Pogranichnik No Sustain Physical Nuke team. This one's an interesting one because it will feature all of the physical characters. For instance, you have Pogra, Chen Qianyu, Endmin or Japan, plus a Laevatain at the end. There's no characters on the field that is able to help you heal or provide you any protection. Usually you will start with Pogra being the main control operator as well with this team, and the thing that they do really well with is just maximizing damage output. After maxing Pogra's Breach, you're gonna get 4 stacks of vulnerability again, and maximize your crush damage as well, along with just doing a lot of damage from everybody, including Laevaitain's kit and Chen Qianyu's ult. You have damage coming on so much that if you are able to use it well, you can actually do so much damage that you can nuke bosses straight up. Now the reason why they're not in tier S though is because, well, you do lack sustain with this team. You're not exactly going to have a blast in stages where it takes your health away slowly, like in one of the Umber Monument stages, or you're just not going to have as much fun against AoE situations where you might not be able to land all your vulnerabilities that you need to maximize your damage. So in longer fights like those AoE waved enemies where one wave come in, you beat them, the second wave come in, a sustain is actually quite an important part to a team, which is why I think while they are good, I don't think they're at S tier. In terms of damage though, they're definitely S tier, which we'll touch on that later. But yep, for general use case, the Pogra Sustainless Physical team will be in tier A for me. Next off will be Ember. This one's an interesting one because there's actually 2 main ways Ember is being used. One of the ways being a heal or protection character that's just there to help you sustain for your physical team, and you're still using Endmin as the controlled operator most of the time to land a crush, and that's one of her builds, and you can have that work as well. That team would still be in tier A. But the other build that Ember can be built with is this. It'll feature the 3-piece Swordmancer set where you're gonna get stagger efficiency bonus, and you'll be combining that with the ether tech plating where you're gonna get damage bonus versus staggered. So yep, you may not have heard about it. There is a build going around with Ember which utilizes her ability to land stagger really well, and there's a few reasons for that. First of all, as I mentioned, the Swordmancer set giving you more efficiency bonus, including the plating as well, and second of all, being a great sword character, she has access to the Sundered Prince, which deals even more stagger to the enemy on the final strike. Not to mention, with great sword characters, they actually come with the highest stagger value on their final strike, which is 25. Any other characters will come with lower stagger, which is why the idea with this Ember build is to be able to stagger the boss so quickly that they'll be constantly interrupted and eventually staggered, and you'll still do a bunch of damage with Ember's final strike as well. The team will still feature a physical team, except you can choose to just not have Endmin in your team at all and just run full physical, and the whole idea is just to stagger the boss. You turn off your brain and spam your basic attacks. Use your skill if you want to. You can use Endmin's Crush as well once you have 4 stacks of vulnerability, but the whole main idea is to just control any boss with Amber's continuous stagger effect that the boss barely gets to like do much. Now the reason why they're not at a higher tier is because, well, this setup doesn't have the highest of damage output, while it does have one of the highest safety features locked into a team where you're controlling any big bosses or destroying mobs by just staggering them so quickly. They don't have that same level of firepower as some other teams, right? I think that's totally fair. And not to mention, they're not exactly the strongest for AoE scenarios that's scattered. A lot of teams tend to struggle with that. And the Ember Stagger build is kind of in the same boat. But well, for the fact that she is very unique and generally useful, where you have a lot of protection with Ember herself already, it's really simple to use. You just gotta spam your basic. I put this team in A tier. You can still clear any endgame with this setup, at least so far, but I do think it might change in the future, depending on how strong the enemies get. But for now though, using an Ember to mainly push any Umbral Monument or endgame bosses is still a valid tag. And moving up next will be Last Rite. Last Rite's team for general use will probably involve Last Rite, Zyhe, Alesh, and either gilberta or Ardelia. There's also an option to swap out Alesh for Yvonne, but in any case though, Last Rite will fall in a similar position as Yvonne for me. Last Rite is really single target focused. However though, if you do have a gilberta, it actually solves that quite well. Last Rite will just slash away at 5 enemies once you've gathered all the enemies into one point, and you'll still do massive damage to deal with AoE situations decently, but it's definitely not as good as Yvonne can though. However, Last Rite does compensate by pretty much being the best single target nuker, where once you have her ult, you know an elite is almost instantly melted, and you don't even have to take that long to like set it up. You just need to press your ult. It will probably just one-shot an elite. Not to mention there's also her combo that contributes to a lot of damage. Her single target abilities is something that no one doubts anymore. It's just that her AoE capabilities does hold her back, which is why I think for general use case, she's not as strong as tier S, but I do think it can be mitigated, say with Yvonne, by using gilberta on the team. And in fact, if you have gilberta and Yvonne on the team too, you can pretty much have a team that's versatile for either AoE control by using Yvonne's ability to take off gilberta's nature infliction, then go for Last Rite plus Zyhe's ability to land cryo infliction, and focus on getting Last Rite's kit to pop off. That's actually a versatile team that can work anywhere, and it's actually quite good to use. For all of that factors considered, I do think Last Rite is in tier A, not exactly bad enough to be in tier B. Speaking of which, let's go into tier B, which we have Avywenna and Estella. We'll start by talking about Avywenna. She's actually not that bad that I say, you know, she's in tier B, but I do think she's actually close to being tier A for general use. You see, Avywenna's entire shtick is just land Thunder Lances on the field and click skill once you have multiple of them. Once you have multiple Thunder Lances on field, and you'll do massive damage for anyone hit by the Thunder Lance. For general use against bosses fights or like Umbral Monument with AoE situations or just general dungeon clearing, Avywenna may struggle with just scattered enemies where they might not be in a position where they'll get hit by all the Thunder Lances, and that I think is the main thing with Avywenna that might not put her in tier A. Her damage output is nothing to be scoffed at though. She's one of the best burst DPS for like speed clears, which we have a tier list for it later, but for general use, she does have the weakness of letting the enemies scatter around, someone's in front of her and behind her at the same time, while the lances, you can't really control where they land after you put them down, so you might have some damage lost there, and the moment you miss it, you have to set it up again. It does take a while, and sometimes it can feel a little bit redundant, but overall, she's still a strong character that can be used generally. It just takes a bit more effort to make sure you land all the Thunder Lances damage though. Now, next on the list, we'll talk about Estella. Now, Estella's entire shtick is to be able to land physical status while having solidification related effect in her kit. So the Estella team that should be used here in this case would be Estella, Alesh, Chen Xianyu, and Endmin. The whole idea is to have Estella land cryo infliction, then Alesh to turn him to solidification. Estella's combo will be able to land physical statuses, same with Chen Xianyu, for you to finish things off with Endmin. You can consider swapping off Alesh for gilberta, just to make it more of a controlled solidification team that still has damage output from the Endmin, but it definitely lacks damage. It actually plays incredibly well in AoE situations like daily dungeons, where you can control enemies constantly that's in an AoE scenario, and just murder any elites as well by finishing them off with 4 vulnerability crushes from the Endmin. You do have physical susceptibility on Estella as well, so it's a team that actually makes sense. But for the lack of damage output compared to some other teams, and obviously, solidification isn't exactly as strong against bosses, where you can't really control the boss, right? But you can control a bunch of like the mobs though. I've ranked Estella's team in B. Now you'll notice there is an empty seat here, which is where I'm gonna point this out. All of these teams are good in their respective places, some just more versatile than the others. It doesn't mean say an Avywenna team cannot be used generally just because I ranked her low. It's just that you may have to compensate some of her weaknesses with some better skill or better allies, and they'll still work really well if you play them correctly. That's the beauty of Arknights Endfield, at least right now. Almost all teams are just usable in every bit of endgame really if you play them well. With the first list out the way, do remember that was the general tier list for general use. Here I've prepared for you a second list. For this list, it will be all about speed clearing and damage ceilings. And right before we start, just note that I'd love for this to be a discussion more than just me saying what I think. Do let me know if you agree or disagree, or if you have any fun facts or your, discoveries of yourself in the comment section down below to maybe disprove some of our rankings or maybe have an opinion about any of these rankings for sure. I do hope you keep it civil though. Now to jump in on this list where it's a speed clear list, we'll start with tier S and we have Rite. The Rite nuke thing that I'm talking about here will involve Rite herself, Zyhe, Ardelia, and Perlica. This team's entire idea is to just maximize cryo infliction and debuffs and buffs as well, all for Rite to just finish the boss off with a quick combo right into an ult with every buff and debuff intact. I myself made a vid on this and the damage output is insane for single target scenarios, and for speed clear situations, Rite is one of the best characters out there with the highest single target damage ceiling. She's sort of like a specialist. Now I will say, if you're saying speed clear for AoE situations, she's certainly not in S tier, but I would say for that factor she will like drop her tier, which is why I have her dropping a tier in the general list. And all of this is just to explain that this list is for ceilings, right? It's for the highest damage, it's for burst damage, and there are players that value that really highly for certain characters, which is why I thought I've prepared this list as well. It might be a redundant thing though, which I'm not gonna like spend too much time here, but hey, if you're a player that cares about really high speed meta, in fact you'll have to build different teams for different scenarios to speed clear them quickly, right? Under situations where it's just one boss, Rite's place as the queen of burst damage is hard to take on. With Rite out the way, let's take a look at Pogra. Now as mentioned before, this Pogra team will involve this Sustainless Physical team with Pogra, Endmin, Chen Tianyu, and Li Feng. This team's a glass cannon team and they can perform so well if you can land all the vulnerabilities, the crushes, the breaches, and you can reach really high damage output incredibly quickly from all fronts. Li Feng's ultimate, Chen Tianyu, Pogra himself, and of course Administrator. All of them do a lot of damage if you have high investment, and for speed cleared players, this is a team that's really strong as well that can beat a lot of teams quickly. This team wouldn't do as good in AoE scenarios, but again though, we're not talking about that. This is truly a list for speed clear teams where you're trying to beat specific situations incredibly quickly. And honestly right now, the more popular test or the more popular challenge that the whole community is taking part of is to just speed clear bosses, right? So your Pogranichnik in a physical sustainless setup is really strong for that. Next off, let's talk about Laevatain. Well, it sounds like a broken record at this point, but Laevatain still incredibly strong for even speed clear situations. You may have to take off Akikuri for Antal for this though, or maybe even specific setups of using gilberta instead of Ardelia. Long story short, Laevatain's numbers are just high enough to still be in S tier, and that will be your best speed clear characters that you're chasing really speedy clears and really high damage output in a short amount of time. With that said though, let's go to tier A. The first character we see will be Yvonne. Now I will say the Yvonne nuke team actually still can do really good damage, so I'm really tempted to just put her in S. In fact, I might just put her in S, but for the fact that she might be a bit overshadowed by the queen of cryo nuke like Rite, I do think Yvonne is somewhere high in A tier, really close to S really if you set up a Yvonne nuke, right? I might actually consider changing Yvonne's place to tier S. Actually, if I can make any changes, that's something I would do. I'll just put Yvonne in S as well. She might not just out damage a Rite, but she is close in like a speed clear situation and setup. She can still nuke bosses quickly with really high burst damage during her ult. So yeah, you know what? That's like my one tiny oopsie, I guess. I did put her tier A, but even if she's in tier A, she's high tier A. Moving forward though, we see Avywenna. Now Avywenna generally isn't in tier A in my opinion, but for the fact that with good setup, with her nuke setup in fact, which will involve a team like Avywenna, Perlica, gilberta, and someone like Akikuri or Arknights, that Avywenna nuke team is able to melt a lot of bosses, and even for some Umber Monument stages as well, especially for ones that has like a core thing you have to break and then they get staggered right after. Avywenna's Thunder Lances can instantly melt that and you instantly stagger the boss. Set up a couple of Thunder Lances and you actually melt the bosses really well, which is why for a speed clear situation, Avywenna is like a do or die. You set all your Thunder Lances up once, you one-shot a boss, or you don't, and you have to do it again, but it doesn't take as long as you would think. But then again though, the limits of her damage is definitely still there considering she's just a 5-star, but with all the factors considered, I think putting her in A is valid. Next off though, we see the Endmin / Japan Crush teams. Nothing much really to be said about these. Just do know that with these normal physical teams, you usually assume you have somewhat of a sustain slot, either Ardelia or Ember, and the reason why they are not ranked S is because, well, if you have a sustain, you do like a little bit more damage and oomph in a speed clear situation. Can you still do it though? Yep, but are you faster than if you would just not go sustain and have a full Pogranichnik type sustainless physical team? Probably no. So for that, I have put them in tier A. If you play them well, you can still speed clear really good. Moving on from tier A, we see tier B with Ember. Now this specific Ember team is the one with the Stagger build, and the Stagger build Ember is good for, staggering bosses and interrupting them as well, but she's not exactly built for speed clears obviously, since she herself is more of a protective character to begin with anyway. So for that simple reason, I think she's in B. General use case though, and just safety wise, considering all of those in the general tier list, I have put her higher. And finally, we do see Estella. For speed clear situation, Estella is really not the best option out there. You are better off just using like a full physical team without Estella. But if you are trying to force the Estella though, can she actually still beat bosses? Absolutely. People have done that. It's just not as simple. It may not be the choice that makes the most sense unless you just love the character dearly. But yep, that's pretty much a quick look at the speed clear list. If you're a player that really cares about beating stuff really quick for every endgame mode, you have like the fastest clears, fastest teams. These are usually the team that does well for like, nearing to the higher tiers. Do let me know if you agree with this one. And finally, this is sort of like a for fun list. We have the character tier list. I'm not gonna go through every single one of them, but I will mention this. For a game like Arknights Endfield, having like a whole character list is kind of redundant because, well, all the characters do better in different scenarios and especially in different teams. So I don't really know what is the point of having like a character tier list, because they are nothing in the wrong team and they are something in the right situations with the right team, right? I ranked it generally anyway though, based on just the value on paper. And yeah, I'll pick a few that's interesting, I suppose. Like in the top tier, you see a lot of the supports like Ardelia and gilberta. Two of the more general supports that's just good in a lot of different teams, especially Ardelia. And we do see someone like Endmin being ranked S, I suppose, since even for the Sustainless physical team, Endmin is still a character there. So technically the value for building Endmin is insanely high because you can use him in like a more casual setting with sustains on the squad or without. You can do both. And moving to the A tier, you see a lot of the other supports or sub DPSs as well. We do see someone like Chen Xianyu being one of the sub DPS slash support straight up. We do see someone like Zaihi, Wolfguard, Akikure. These are really generic names that you see in a lot of different teams, respective to their own archetype, since they're just really good at like placing arts infliction or buffs or cryo or just susceptibility in general. Of course, we do have the damage dealers like Yvonne and Rite, significantly good under certain scenarios, not as good in some others, which is why they're an A. And moving on, we do have B tier. These are the less popular options, I would say, or at the very least, they are quite specific. Someone like Estella is pretty specific, where, you're trying to run the whole solidification tech with a mix of physical as well. It's kind of niche, at least right now. But for the rest of the options, though, they are probably like still good and very good in their respective teams. Like Rite, very strong for like an Yvonne team, just to get the cryo infliction up. However, her weakness will be the lack of buffs and debuffs. She does have infliction, but that's like her mainstay. The higher tier members for the supportive characters usually have something like a debuff, susceptibility, or buff that really help the main damage dealer do more. Rite does give the infliction, which is really convenient, but I do think she can still be considered A, maybe for the convenience, but for the damage ceiling though, not exactly, right? And yeah, moving on, we have tier C, which is reserved for Mr. Catcher here. In like a proper physical team with Catcher, like he'll still have a job at just landing vulnerability. That's actually his thing. He has protection, he has vulnerability. He's kind of like the lower Ember, but well, for the fact that there is just straight up an Ember in the game, and for also the fact that with a whole physical setup, you don't really think Catcher first. There's so much other options that are just more consistent with landing vulnerabilities and easier to trigger the combo as well compared to Catcher, with even a more useful combo. If anything, Catcher seems to not be like the most valuable character of all time, and that's okay. Do remember the meta might change with newer characters and such, right? And with all that said, that is all for the tier list. I've prepared 3 in total. Do let me know what you think about all of them. I've tried to consider a lot of different factors, a lot of different situations, and based on my own testing, my builds, and what I've watched, to compile this full list for the very first version of Arknights Endfield. I hope I helped you out, and yep, I do hope this video comes as a discussion. I'd love to see what the community thinks. Hope I helped you out, and take care.